To begin, let me share a bit of background to explain how I found myself in this situation. After high school, around 2003, finding a job proved to be quite challenging. Consequently, I took whatever undesirable jobs I could find to make ends meet. When I landed a full-time job cleaning up fire and water damage, I was elated to have a steady income and start saving. However, this excitement soon turned into a nearly 2-year nightmare. The company I worked for assigned me to my first job, which involved cleaning up water damage in a basement that had been flooded with sewage. After a few days of hard work, we completed the job and moved on to the next. The following morning, my boss called me into his office and informed me about a special crew he was assembling. He asked if I would be the crew leader, supervising 3 other individuals who had just been hired. This struck me as odd since I had only been with the company for about 3 days. Nevertheless, I assumed my work ethic had paid off, and I looked forward to a raise, given that I was only making $10 an hour to start. However, not only did I not receive a raise, but I also received no training for my new role, except for a work van filled with cleaning materials and the phone numbers of the 3 new hires, who were also tasked with fire and water damage cleanup. My boss provided me with information on the best tools and cleaning products to use for sanitization, along with the location of everything in the van, complete with hazmat suits and respirators. However, he was vague about the nature of the cleanup tasks, only stating that each job would be different and I would receive detailed instructions for each. He referred to my position as CSC crew leader and assured me that I would never have to encounter the deceased, as the coroner would have already removed the remains by the time my crew arrived. I was expected to use my judgment to determine what needed to be removed from homes and what could be cleaned, my first assignment in this new role, which my boss had mentioned when I arrived at the office, was to clean up the remains of an elderly person who had passed away in their home. The individual had been sitting in a chair for quite some time. Upon our arrival, the coroner guided me inside to point out several hazardous materials that needed removal due to the risk of disease. It seemed that my boss had connections with people from the county coroner's office, as many of our jobs were recommended by them. Notably, the deceased individual was still present in the house and was fully visible to me and 1 other member of the crew. The stench was unbearable, and the sight was horrifying. The other 3 individuals I worked with managed to handle the situation relatively well, although 2 of them fell ill from the smell and had to step outside to vomit. We all waited outside until the coroner's support team arrived to remove the deceased. Following that, my crew and I began our work. Strange occurrences began to unfold after about 5 minutes. First, as I was disassembling the chair and placing parts in special hazmat bags, the base of the chair started to move on its own while I was approximately 10 feet away, near the front door. Nobody else was in the same room, as the other crew members were in the basement, handling boxes. I brushed it off as best I could and continued disassembling the chair. However, as I placed the chair's base in the bag, I suddenly felt a chill down my spine, even though I was wearing a full hazmat suit in the heat of June. Next, I had to remove the carpet and assess the floor to determine if it could be cleaned or if a section needed removal. I called my boss for guidance, and he instructed me to pour a special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards, assuring me it would be sufficient. I retrieved the cleaner from the truck, where he had mentioned it would be, and brought it inside. Upon re-entering the house, I found all 3 crew members in the basement scrambling to get out, tripping over each other. When I asked them what was happening, all 3 claimed they had seen someone in the cluttered basement, and they assumed it was a homeless person or a drug addict, given the area's issues with such individuals. After listening at one of the open basement windows for a few minutes and hearing nothing, another crew member and I ventured inside, armed with a flashlight and a metal fence post. We searched the basement but found no one. However, we heard a terrible coughing fit coming from somewhere in the basement. We investigated but found nothing, although the corner of the basement had dust stirred up as if someone had moved things recently, which left us feeling uneasy. We called the others back inside, and they resumed working with the boxes. However, all of them felt as though they were being touched while handling materials that had been exposed to bodily fluids. I returned to my task upstairs and discovered that the cleaner I had placed next to the floorboards was missing. I began to search for it and eventually found it on its side, behind the bag containing the chair's back. This baffled me because there were several other bags in front of this one near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. What's more, I got a chill, but this time, it seemed to be accompanied by an indistinct whisper. I finished cleaning the floorboards and disposed of the trash. That night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man who told us that we were not welcome in his home. He claimed we were destroying his belongings and needed to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house, and the old man cried, pleading for me to stop ruining his things. He attempted to push me out of his house, but it felt as though I were ignoring him. He pushed me, he screamed at me, but I remained unresponsive. He then hurled my cleaner into the pile of trash I had made near the front door, precisely where I later found it. 2 of the 3 crew members shared similar dreams about the old man pushing them as they sorted through boxes of ruined items, disposed of due to the risk of disease from his bodily fluids. They both described feeling as though they had no control over their actions, despite their overwhelming sadness. What struck me was that both mentioned the man becoming increasingly upset and violently coughing in their dreams, which connected to the coughing sound we had heard earlier in the basement. The crew member who had accompanied me to the basement said his dream left him feeling like he had done something wrong and ended with a severe coughing fit. While this might have been a coincidence, it played on my mind. We all discussed our experiences and concluded that our reactions were likely a result of the challenging situations we faced. I was quite interested in psychology and tried to rationalize our experiences to the best of my ability. We hoped for better assignments in the days to come. The subsequent jobs were less harrowing. We cleaned up blood at a home invasion scene, which didn't involve any casualties but left a significant mess. There were a few other crime scenes with bloody aftermath, but nothing particularly noteworthy occurred. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade and were divided into 2 different groups. As the crew leader, I had to visit different sites if the other 2 crew members encountered any issues or lacked guidance. I thought I was growing accustomed to the job, and my fellow crew members seemed to be adjusting as well. However, I was mistaken. The next job that brought eerie activity was a suicide scene involving a middle-aged man. The coroner had already removed the body, but the aftermath was a gruesome mess. The man had used a large-caliber handgun or shotgun, resulting in blood and brain matter splattered across the basement, resembling a second living room. Skull fragments were lodged in the drywall, making cleanup incredibly challenging. Additionally, the body hadn't been discovered for some time, which had intensified the odor. The first step in cleaning was to use a backpack vacuum cleaner to remove all biohazard material. The coroner had mentioned that he and his partner felt extremely uneasy in the house and sensed something odd. Unfortunately, we soon experienced the same sensation upon entering the basement. To add to the discomfort, the man's family had gathered upstairs, grieving, but the noise of our vacuum cleaners drowned out their cries. As I continued cleaning, the power to the lights suddenly went out, plunging the basement into pitch darkness. This was peculiar because my vacuum cleaner was still running. My crew member began screaming, and I turned off my vacuum and descended from my ladder, assuming he might have touched a light switch. However, even after I turned off my vacuum, his screams continued, and I could hear items being knocked over. Fumbling for my flashlight on my tool belt, I called out to my crew member, asking what was happening. All I received in response was panicked screaming. In the pitch-black room, I saw a darker shape moving towards me, which sent a shiver down my spine. I was startled and stumbled backward while searching for my flashlight. When I finally turned it on and aimed it at the dark figure, I saw the silhouette of a man with a flannel shirt, a beard, and an expression that looked as if he were about to attack me. Then, he vanished. My crew member, positioned behind the entity, was sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth with his hands on his head. As I approached him, he picked up his flashlight, turned it on, and bolted up the stairs and out of the house, where he promptly vomited. I followed him, inquiring about his well-being and the reason for his screams. He explained that he had been scrubbing a wall and felt something pulling on an item in his tool belt. He initially thought it was me, but when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was enveloped by what he described as dark smoke. He struggled to breathe and move. Eventually, he managed to extract his flashlight, but something yanked it from his hand, as though his wrist had been forcefully grabbed. When he screamed, items started falling off an entertainment center beside him, and the dark smoke receded. He mentioned losing his hearing and not realizing he had been making noise. Items from the shelves landed on him, which is why he covered his head. The dark smoke vanished, but he felt sick and the light from my flashlight intensified this feeling. We decided to take an early lunch, and my crew member sat there, looking pale and hardly saying a word. I didn't reveal that I had also seen a man when I turned on my flashlight, as we needed to complete the job, and I didn't want to plant that idea in his mind since he hadn't mentioned seeing it. Upon returning to the basement, the lights were back on, some of the items that had fallen off the shelves were back on the entertainment center, the TV was tuned to a baseball game, and a new smell lingered in the room, similar to burnt hair. My crew member stayed for half an hour, became sick again, and left for the day, leaving me alone to complete the job, which I dreaded but had no choice since the other crew members were on different assignments. After vacuuming everything, I proceeded to scrub the old congealed blood, a tough task due to its adhesive quality, especially with the presence of brain matter. While finishing up, I kept catching glimpses of a person-shaped figure in my peripheral vision. Each time, I caught a whiff of that strange burnt hair scent, and sometimes, I felt as though something was tugging at the items on my tool belt. When I finished the job, I headed upstairs to use the bathroom. Along the way, I heard faint crying or moaning, as if someone were in distress. I froze, thinking a family member might have returned. However, when I turned around, there was no one there. I did notice a picture on the wall of a man with a beard wearing a flannel shirt, surrounded by several other pictures depicting him in different scenarios, each involving a different flannel shirt, some with deer or fish, others with family. I hadn't seen a picture of that man, as I hadn't ventured elsewhere in the house or used the bathroom downstairs, given the hassle of donning and doffing hazmat gear. As I secured the house, closing windows, locking doors, and turning off the lights, I saw the front curtain move and again spotted the darker-than-black form in the front window. My final eerie encounter in this thread occurred in mid-July in a particularly rough area of Detroit. There had been an incident where a man was suspected of trying to abduct a child. He was apprehended by locals who beat him severely, and he sought refuge in his house. The police response time was notably slow, and a mob had gathered outside, pelting the man's house with rocks and damaging his car. The man sustained injuries from the assault and died inside the home. This incident had sparked rumors that it was a misunderstanding, and the man had been attempting to help an injured child. Some kids who knew the injured girl had reported that he was kidnapping her, leading to the aggressive response from the community. Our task was to clean up the aftermath. The job seemed straightforward: secure windows, clean up blood and bodily fluids. However, as soon as I entered the house, a wave of fear and sadness washed over me. The feeling was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and it hit me in waves, making my legs feel weak. My working partner, who arrived late and hadn't heard the backstory from the police, also reported the same overwhelming sensations. Throughout our time in the house, we kept seeing a form darting around corners, as if it were watching us and then hiding. It resembled a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard faint cries for help from various areas in the house, along with phrases like, "Please stop," and drawn-out, "No." The crowd outside began yelling at the house again, and during this time, the activity inside the house increased. We could hear the sound of running footsteps going up the stairs, a door slamming, and it seemed as though the front door was opening and closing. Although we didn't see any of the doors move, the path of the footsteps sounded like someone entering through the front door, moving through the living room, proceeding to the bathroom, and then climbing the stairs to the upstairs bungalow room. What unsettled me the most was that I could feel the vibrations in the floor as if someone were running past me while I cleaned various areas. Each time accompanied by those waves of fear and sadness. When we finally left the house, there were still people sitting on their porches nearby. They were hostile, yelling random things, and their attention soon turned toward us as we loaded our van and removed our hazmat suits. We ignored their jeers, but before we could finish loading all the materials from the house and lock it up, the front door slammed shut with a sound so loud that it terrified me and my crew member. It resembled a gunshot and startled the people on the nearby porches, causing them to retreat inside their homes. The front door's deadbolt appeared to be locked, and we couldn't open it. We decided to leave some leftover boards in the house. Given the situation, the relief I felt when I finally left that house was immense. Inside, I had been anxious, scared, paranoid, and overwhelmed by a sense of dread. However, the moment I stepped outside, it was like a switch had been flipped. I immediately felt better, and my crew member and I started joking and laughing about trivial things, returning to the typical behavior of 19 and 20-year-olds. I've documented many of these stories in detail in a journal I started after my first 3 months on the job. I spoke to the other crew members and gathered their strange tales as well. I realized that some of these experiences could be attributed to our subconscious minds trying to cope with the traumatic situations we encountered. But there were other occurrences that defied any logical explanation, and hearing similar stories from my crew members, who had not been influenced by mine, made these encounters even more unsettling. When I have the time, I'll extract more stories from my journal and share them. The job became increasingly nightmarish after I began the journal, with more instances that I believe were paranormal. Many situations put immense stress on my mental state, to the point where my facade of sanity began to slip. In the end, I worked at this place for nearly 2 years, and of my entire crew, all 3 passed away. 2 died by unalive themselves, and 1 succumbed to an overdose. We can't be sure if it was intentional, but what is certain is that each one of them, all around my age, 19 or 20, started the job as normal, well-adjusted individuals with the world at their feet. I watched as they gradually lost their zest for life, and while it may sound callous, each of them chose to end their lives in a way that spared another person from witnessing the horrors we encountered.